Well, I want to thank everybody from around the world today for joining us for this webinar. My name is Angus Cowan. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for North America. I live in Montreal, but today I'm in Vancouver, Canada, where we are preparing for the World Cup in just a few weeks' time. We have a busy schedule today over the next 45 minutes. I'm joined by my colleague today, Per Skog, Senior Advisor at Next 365, who will walk us through the AP automation discussion. We're hoping for an interactive session today. Ask questions. We have a chat available, and I'll do my best to look at the chat as we go through the session today to make sure questions come to the forefront. If for some reason we don't get to your questions, we'll be more than happy to address them after this webinar this morning. Before we get to the presentation on AP automation, I just wanted to give a few moments for an overview of Next 365. So I just beg your patience for a couple of moments. At Next 365, we provide independent, expert advisory and senior specialist services across our clients' Dynamics 365 journey. We work as an embedded part of our clients' teams. And there's a couple of things and a couple of ways that we work with our clients. One is to help our clients build up their own D365 capability in-house to take full ownership of their transformation, or engage as an external implementation partner for the technical and functional delivery of D365. But no matter the ambition and transformation scenario, we help our clients across their D365 journey to increase their capabilities to become more successful. In the end, our goal is to ensure that every client that we work with is a reference client. We provide a wide range of services, a comprehensive range of services, I would say, of value-added programs and assessments and offerings across the D365 ecosystem. This can include helping clients prepare for a successful Dynamics 365 journey, helping the clients to drive organizational change with their organization, and even manage, and most importantly, manage and execute Dynamics 365 implementations. One area that we see is growing tremendously in this day and age is helping clients to continuously improve the use of Dynamics 365 after go live to make the best use of new technology opportunities and secure ongoing business benefit realization. As we all can attest, a successful D365 transformation is all about people and that the client has the right capabilities to be successful. If we can just go to the next slide, Per. Every client wants to ensure that they have the A-team from their partners. And we strive for our expert advisors and senior specialists at Next 365 to be among the best within our industry with significant hands-on experience from local and global Dynamics 365 implementations. Per, if we could just move to the next slide. On this slide, one can see that we have a wide range of clients across the globe and across industries. And we'd be happy to discuss any of the clients that are on this slide post this webinar if one would like to dive deeper. But as I mentioned before, the key for us is to ensure that every client that we have is a reference client. And finally, we just want to note we have local offices across 9 countries and we're rapidly growing our global presence. This allows us to support our clients wherever their business takes them and provide the ideal mix of local and global expertise to help prepare, manage, and execute their D365 transformations. And this can be across ERP, CRM, Power Platform, and the ever-increasing presence of AI. With that, I'd like to pause, and now I'd like to pass the baton to my colleague Per Skog.
Thank you, Angus. So, Per Skog, I'm working at Next 365 as a Dynamics Finance Operations Senior Specialist and Advisor. I've been working within the F&O or AX space for 21 years now. I've been working at end clients, at the large ISV, at other consultancy firms. I've been with Next 365 now for a little bit over 3 years. My specialty is within the old trade and logistics and finance. So a lot of focus on record to report, order to cash, source to pay. And today, of course, we're going to focus on accounts payable and accounts payable automation. So the AP and the invoice process in particular has a couple of challenges that you're probably well aware of. It usually is a fairly manual process, especially if you don't use anything for AP automation. You're going to receive emails, receive paper invoices. You're probably going to stamp them with a number. You might put some sort of preliminary coding on the paper, and then you will send it to the desk of the person who needs to approve it. This can take quite some time. Invoices can be lost. I know many years ago, our AP clerk at the company I worked at that time, she always took a copy of all invoices. So she took a copy, she kept on her desk, and then she sent the other copy out for approval. And many times she had to go back to her copy and send it out again. When you're working manually, there's of course a high risk of errors in the process, and it has a high process cost. So what the manual invoice costs to process varies of course from country to country, and it varies from time to time. But I think you can find the average processing cost for your respective country fairly easily. It's usually part of for example, Ardent Partner or any other analyst has this kind of data available. So why should you do AP automation? So this is based on a report from Ardent Partners, the state of e-payables done in 2023. So if they're comparing the best in class accounts payable teams, that is the top 20%, with the norm, so to say, we can see that the top 20% have about 2 times better, more automation, invoices that are processed straight through. And what does straight through mean? Straight through basically means that the invoices comes in, it goes through the system, it is posted. No one has really looked at it, no one has done anything with it. It's just completely approved and handled automatically. They spend less time responding to supplier inquiries. They have a lot faster, 81% higher efficiency in processing a single invoice. So in this example, Ardent Partner found that it was 3.4 days for the top 20% compared to 17.9 days for the norm, so to say. And a much lower invoice processing cost compared to the norm as well. So there is a very tangible benefit in looking into AP automation and adapting it. So reduce cost, that's what we talked about on the previous slide. But other things why it's important to do AP automation is to reduce manual work, freeing up time from the AP clerks to focus on what matters. So the exceptions, doing analytics, doing everything that can increase value from the process. We have an increased efficiency. We have usually quite a bit better control in form of both traceability and validations. We can get a standardized process, and if we're getting invoices approved on time, we're getting them paid on time, and this will hopefully help to strengthen our vendor relationships with our vendors. So that's why we want to do this. What do we need to do to get started? So those of you who've heard or talked to someone about AI falls back to that you need to have good data. And that basically is true for all types of automation, especially for AP automation. We need good data to build our automation on top of. We need to have master data in the form of our vendors set up correctly. We need to have bank accounts. We need to have terms of payment. We need to have VAT numbers. We need to have other sort of registration numbers. We need to have good PO data that is actually also correlates with the invoice. So we need to order something on the PO, and we should get an invoice for the same thing Not the same price and not the same quantity, but if we order a door, we want an invoice for a door, and then we can make sure that our automation can work correctly. We'll dive into this a little bit deeper in a moment. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be in there. Dates needs to be in there. We need to have references set up. We need to have everything needed for approval. We need to have, if we're using contracts for matching, we need all of those things in there. But the more data we have, the more accurate the data is, the better our automation will become. When we're looking at automation, we basically have two business areas where we can have automation. We have the automation for AP staff, to have them touch invoices less time spent on each invoice by AP staff. And we have business user automation, so the approvers, having them spend less time on the invoices, perhaps by getting coding suggestions by AI or other rules, by getting invoices auto-approved that they don't need to see, by using thresholds to make sure only the correct invoices go high enough in the approval chain or in the business. And to build this, we usually have what I like to call 4 different types of automations. We have standard business rules. So one example here is purchase order matching. That is a business rule. Are we using 2-way matching? Are we using 3-way matching? Do we have any tolerances? That is just a business rule you set up in the system. RPA, robotic process automation. That's, for me, that's basically more advanced business rules. They're usually not existing in the standard F&O, but could exist in whatever AP solution you're using, or if you're, for example, using Power Automate to help drive your automation. So it's basically a lot of if, then, else, if we simplify a lot, but allowing you to automate based on a lot more things. Machine learning or AI. So based on historical data, based on what you usually do, the system can give you coding, it can give you approvers, it can even, depending on how you set it up, auto-approve invoices with the help of AI. And core functionality within the system. So there's many different things that can help you drive automation. There's a lot of variations on this depending on what solution you're using. Even standard F&O has a lot of this that you can leverage. It's just a matter of using it correctly. So AP staff automation. What should we focus on from a AP perspective? So we want to spend as little time as possible touching the invoices. So what that means is that when we get an invoice into the system, we'll talk a little bit in a couple of slides on the different solutions you could perhaps use. But when we get the invoices in the system, we need to make sure that we immediately get the correct vendor picked up, that we get the bank account that's stated on the invoices being selected on the invoice in F&O, that we find the correct purchase order lines. So this is a typical example of where you set up business rules. So for vendors, you're perhaps going to run with your VAT numbers, your local registration IDs, or even an email address that you get on the invoice, and using this to find the correct vendor automatically based on the vendor master data. You will use the scanned bank account to pick up the correct bank account in F&O. You will use the description and the item identifier on the PO lines, invoice lines, and connect those to the PO lines. So typical example of business rules. To automate the process, there are several things that we can do. Sadly, I see that we lost a couple of letters here in the slide, so we'll update that before after the session. So let's say, for example, that you have a vendor where all invoices should require POs. So that means that you create a rule saying that if I get an invoice from this vendor that doesn't have a PO number, then we should basically fail it immediately. It's an exception. We need to send it back to the vendor because we should always have a PO. We can create complex validation rules on top of what's in standard. Power Automate is one way of doing that if you're using standard. So basically, if this field is not set to that value, then we should stop the invoice or something like that. Are we using prepayments? Should we apply prepayments automatically? Should we not apply them automatically? How should we apply them automatically? Do we want the system to automatically settle a credit and a debit invoice with each other without having to do that manually? Do we want to have the system posting invoices automatically that are approved? Are we using some sort of pre-coding? We can either have business rules for pre-coding, or we can use machine learning for pre-coding. So that's automating the process. We can use sales tax, especially in Europe, is always a very fun area where we now, with the new, let's say they're not that new, but when you can have multiple VAT registrations in multiple countries, and which VAT you should use depending on where you're shipping where the goods were shipped from contra where they're shipped to. So in one case, when you're buying from the same vendor, it's going to be Swedish VAT. In another case, it's going to be Danish VAT. And in the third case, it's going to be European reverse charge VAT, just depending on the ship to, ship from addresses. So this is an example, for example, where the Microsoft tax calculation service helps quite a bit with when you tie that together with AP automation. You might want things to happen automatically. So if this invoice is has a certain type of it, we should just get it paid immediately. So using business rules or RPA to create automatic actions. And then, of course, for the approval process from a AP staff perspective, what we really want to focus on is to get the correct approval rules. So we can either define them in a rules engine, we can use machine learning to set them. I personally really like dynamic approval. If you're using standard F&O, you cannot really get dynamic approval. But if you're using some of the best in class AP solutions that you can use with F&O, most of them support dynamic approval. And dynamic approval, what I mean with that is if something happens with the invoice, the approval rules are reread and reapplied to update the approval chain. So a very classic scenario is that you have a base approval route or approval rule that says that the first person is whoever ordered it, the second person is who owns the cost center, and the third person is based on money, and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, and so on. So in the example where we get an invoice for a conference, the first person, the person who ordered it, is the receptionist. The receptionist then looks at the invoice, split it into two lines, go the first line to IT and the second line to marketing, approves it. With dynamic approval, for the IT line, the IT manager is added as the second approver. And for the marketing line, the marketing manager is added for the second approval. So this is a thing that's, we'll come back to it, but that's an area that standard F&O doesn't really support, but it's really useful when you have cost center driven approval or any type of dimension driven approval. And then, of course, to get insights into what's happening. How long are invoices out for approval? Who are the bottlenecks? How many price variances do we have? How many quantity variants do we have? All of these things help making sure that we can improve the process as we're going forward. If we're looking at the business user automation side of things, so helping the users to only approve what is needed, I think the most important part is auto approval. And the classical one is PO matching. So we're looking at the invoice, we're looking at the purchase order. If we're using freeway matching, we're looking at the goods receipt. We have our tolerances, and we're able to get invoices auto-approved based on what we set up. Several of the best-in-class AP solutions have something called agreements or contract matching. And standard F&O also have that since a couple of months ago, something called recurring invoices. So where you can define a rules engine or a rule set for when a non-PO invoice should be auto-approved. Typical example here is just as it's called in standard F&O, recurring invoices, leasing, insurance, rent, similar things. But depending on how complex your agreement or contract matching engine is, you can use it for many, many things, such as milestone payments on projects or acceptable usage policies for travel. There's a lot of things you can look at by using agreements. And these two, they lower the amount of invoices that an approver needs to look at. If they need to look at an invoice, we want to help them to, as quickly as possible, verify and make the changes to the coding if needed. One way of doing that is to filtering what they can code on. So instead of giving them the entire chart of accounts, we're only giving them the accounts in certain cost classes. So if you're working in IT, you only get the IT accounts. And if you're working in marketing, you're only getting the marketing accounts. We also want to help them when we have dimensions coming in from multiple places. We can have dimensions coming from the vendor. We have dimensions coming from the project. So when you code an invoice to a project, we need to make sure that the correct dimensions are merged in the way you like them to merge. Once again, this is something standard doesn't do very well, but it's something that the best in class solutions do better. As an approver, you also want insight into the process. What's happening with the invoice? Who approved it before you? Who's going to approve it after you? How many have you approved? What's waiting? There's a lot of things you want to know that will help you do your work. And of course, communication. Being able to quickly chat or send a Teams message or send an email to AP or to another approver, having everything tied together on the invoice to be able to communicate as you need to while you're working on the invoice from the invoice. So if we're looking here, what we've done with all of this and what we're trying to show here is that we're building a house of AP automation. We need to capture the data one way or another. It could be electronic invoicing, it could be paper, it could be PDF, it can be emails. We need to run it through accounts payable as quickly, as efficiently as possible. We need end users to be able to quickly approve or approve as little as possible. That gives us the AP automation. And supporting this is the process insight and analytics that makes us improve and keep on improving on the process itself. Now, the next slide is a couple of comparisons with some vendors. The information here is stolen from their homepage. So this is what they want to prioritize, so to say. But if we're looking at it, we have two different types of products. To the left, we have the built-in or highly integrated solutions. So DoUp and Xflow, they are built natively for D365. They only work with D365. On the right, we have two ERP agnostic systems, Medius and Basware. There are many more systems out there, especially if you're in Northern America. There's tons there, but I highlight these four because these are the ones you run into the most, and I think the four currently strongest one. Those of you, for example, from Netherlands or Denmark or Europe in general, notice that extension is not on this slide, and that's mainly because they've been bought by Truvio and the product has been end of life, and the suggestion from Truvio is to move to Xflow. So that's the reason extension is not on here. But if we look at it, both DoUp and Xflow built into D365. They are both certified by Microsoft. They are working similarly, but not quite the same. But the strength they have is that they are using the data and the business rules from F&O directly. So they understand account structure. They understand project ledger asset lines. They understand and use the standard matching, etc. all the logic is free. It's coming from inside F&O. The main difference, or one difference, is, for example, DoUp being a completely dedicated AP UI in the web, Xflow being a web UI for approvers, while AP staff work inside the standard D365 forms, or forms in Xflow that looks like the standard D365 forms. So, but they're both built into D365, leveraging everything you can do in D365. Medius and Basware, they are ERP agnostic. They work with tons of different ERPs. That also means that it's not the core solution that understands the account structure and how F&O works. It's handled in the integrations. And there is a higher risk that something can go wrong in the integration when we're using Medius or Basware. But they are, especially Basware, it's a very large, complex solutions, and they have other capabilities. And if you're using multi-ERP, so if you're not just using D365, but you have other ERPs and you want one way to handle accounts payable, then Medius, Basware, or similar solution is a really good way to go. If you're only using D365, personally, I would look into DoUp and Xflow. Now, the elephant in the room, standard D365 AP automation. Microsoft has pushed standard D365 automation in every release since AX 2012 R2, if I remember correctly. It is a fairly good, simple solution. You have the standard matching, configurable price and quantity. You can do automation. You have standard reports, etc. But it is using the standard workflow engine, which is fairly limited when we're looking at what we can do. The workflow editor is missing certain components. You cannot do everything. If we're looking at a simple thing like PO matching and tolerances, you cannot set up tolerances for categories, only for items. There is some limitations in there. And the actual AP automation part, if we're ignoring the OCR, the invoice capture part, it's been almost the same since AX 2012. There's been some improvements on it, but it hasn't moved that much. The big thing that's happened quite a bit is Microsoft invoice capture. So I've just done a quick comparison between the invoice capture from Microsoft and Tungsten AP Essential, formerly known as Readsoft, which is one of the best-in-breed solutions for OCR. And invoice capture is good enough. It is quite good. It has, especially if you're using standard F&O AP automation, it has automations to help you get the PO lines connected, etc., etc. It has learning side by side, just as you're used to. While depending on how you set up Tungsten, you can do that in many different ways. So you can do it with synchronizing data with F&O, which I personally don't like. I usually just want, when I run Tungsten, I just set it up to capture the data, and then I'll have the tool I'm using in F&O do all of the finding vendor, PO, currency, and etc., etc. But Tungsten is very configurable. You can leverage a lot of automations and integrations if you want to, or you can just use it as a raw data field to whatever solution you're using for AP automation. And there's also actually, I did this slide deck a couple of months ago for another session I had. And one thing that's being more and more common, it's a third option, creating your own OCR using various models and AI components out there. And you can actually get a much better result than both Tungsten and Microsoft Invoice Capture. It's just, as always, right, when you're doing custom AI, look at the cost. And one of the things that's perhaps not super clear until you actually look into the licensing guide from Microsoft, is how they price Microsoft Invoice Capture. You have to buy it based on your highest monthly consumption for the year. So you have to buy a license for 12 months, and you have to buy the number of invoices per month for your highest month. So if you have 20,000 invoices in September and 5,000 invoices every other month, you have to buy for 20,000 invoices. While with Tungsten, you buy based on your yearly volume. So with the pricing the way they are, in many cases, Tungsten or other solution will end up a little bit cheaper if you have large differences between your highest month and your normal months, so to say. So if you have seasonal variances. So that's a quick high-level overview of AP automation, what you should focus on, what tools you could look at, the different components. And we reserved, well, I'm 3 minutes over, but we have 12 minutes left for Q&A. I don't know if we have any question who's come in.
Yes, we do, Pat. We do have one question in the chat. What from Yuri? What kind of dimensions are mentioned for AP automations?
So that actually, Yuri, is quite a good question, because traditionally what you're talking about is financial dimensions only, right? So you're talking about things like cost center, departments, business unit, whatever financial dimensions you have. But when we're talking in a larger scope, we have a lot more dimensions that we could possibly use. So we're talking about, if you're using, for example, the landed cost module, you have voyages, you have cost carriers. If we're talking, what is it called? The bill of lading from TMS, you have load IDs. When we're talking purchase order, you could have inventory dimensions, size, color that you want to use, especially in finding the purchase order lines. So if you have an invoice for a t-shirt 55 color red, t-shirt 55 color yellow, you need to map those two invoice lines to the correct purchase order lines using the inventory dimension of color. So all dimensions are important: financial, inventory, and all of those things. So we got in the chat a question of, in this solution compatible with e-invoicing and e-reporting requirements in European companies? So I'm not talking about one solution. I'm talking about AP automation in general, and I mentioned a couple of different solutions. As far as I know, all of them are more or less compatible with e-invoicing and e-reporting requirements in European countries. Those of you who try to use the standard out-of-the-box electronic invoicing setup in Europe in F&O have probably lost a bit of hair trying to do that, but it's there. You're using electronic reporter, and you usually have to do some stuff on Azure to get the files in, etc. But the core exists in standard. Both Medius, Xflow, Basware, I think do it, I don't know, have support for electronic invoicing in various ways to get them in. Tungsten itself can be used for electronic invoicing, uses Peppol. There's many ways to handle electronic invoices and e-reporting requirements. Now, having said that, these requirements change. I think France is a brilliant example of how things shouldn't happen, how things have moved, and still we're not really, the core functionality in F&O for France isn't really there yet. I think you can get it if you turn on a flighting key or a preview key to get it in there. So there are options, but if you're, for example, looking at Pagero, I didn't mention Pagero, but Pagero is a really big electronic invoice provider in Europe and globally. They have guaranteed support for France. So there's many. Electronic invoicing isn't easy. There's many components. You need to have a provider on the network. You need to have support to get invoices in, and you need to process them in your system. So there's many things to think about to get it in there. But in general, it does work.
Yeah. I have another question here. Travel and expenses workflow is a bit different from core AP. What would be your recommendation in this area?
So for me, there are two different things, right? So that's really, it's the same thing like purchase order workflow is a different thing. So I don't fully get the question 100%, but when you're running AP, you need an AP workflow. When you're running travel expense, you need a travel expense workflow. From my perspective, in theory, they should be built on basically the same thing. Who ordered something for an invoice? Who bought something for travel expense? Who needs to approve it? Cost center owner, department manager, whatever, and money. The problem that I see it, especially when we're talking invoices, is that invoices are usually coded to multiple cost centers. So we need to make sure that we have a workflow that supports routing to multiple different people, and that each line can go to various different cost center, and preferably that we can have dynamic approval. When we're talking travel and expense, that's usually not as important. Historically, where I worked and the cases I've seen, is it's usually you and your manager and then managers for money. So it's a fixed flow. So it's a much easier workflow. But it of course varies. And don't forget, several clients are running travel and expense as invoices. So they're setting up their employees as vendors, and they're then running the receipts as invoices against the employee as the vendor. So there's many ways of handling travel and expense and invoices together. And then in the chat, Angus, I think we had
Yeah. Yes, there is, Per. I'll read the question out
Yeah.
for you. Have you heard any rumors from Microsoft and if they are investing in AP? Specifically, are they going to leave their antiquated workflows and move to Power Automate or other solutions? Will their new push in Copilot bring new functionality, etc.?
So I see this as a lot of an or question, so I just say yes. But to be fair, there have been rumors for many years. I'm talking all the way back to when Power Automate came, that you would move from workflow to Power Automate. I think this has gotten, the rumors are getting a lot more concrete now that something is going to happen with the workflows. I think the last thing I heard, the old workflows will remain for legacy reasons, but you should be able to use a new workflow engine. If that's Power Automate or not, I cannot say. But that's the latest thing I've heard, that something new will come. And don't forget that Power Automate can call back and call from and to the standard workflow as well. So you can actually do things with Power Automate while using the old workflows currently as well. So there is some sort of overlap today. And I think with Copilot and agents, yes, there will happen a lot of things. I think they will definitely do a machine learning based pre-coding or coding of invoices. That's basically a really low hanging fruit. So I'm assuming that's going to come very quickly. Yeah.
Okay. We have another question for you, Per. Here, I will read it to you. We currently use Medius and only have no PO invoices. We now want to introduce the PO process and assume we can configure this in F&O, and Medius will auto-match PO invoices. Any experience in the area or known pitfalls with this approach?
So the matching usually works great. And Medius have been a couple of years since I worked with it hands-on, but they have a really good rules engine to help you connect the invoice line with the PO lines. And it also, I think they have extended the matching tolerances compared to what you can do with standard. So it's a really good engine to begin with. But in general, when we're talking PO matching, we have two things you always have to consider. Get the invoice for what you ordered.
Mm-hmm.
So if you order door, get an invoice for door. Don't get an invoice for door frames, handle, keys, locks. So don't have finished goods and bill of material or vice versa. Have it on the same level. That's really important. And of course, make sure that you have something on the invoice that exists somewhere on the PO so that the system can connect the invoice line with the PO line. But Medius should work perfectly for you with the correct setup. it's a very capable system for PO matching.
Okay. Per, we just have a few minutes left. We're down to our last 4 minutes. I have a question here. Can you say a few words about having a good and efficient payment process in F&O when handling multiple legal entities in the same office with individual bank accounts and without using centralized payments/cash pools?
So that is a really good question, because it touches on a area where I think people have missed on something. So a couple of years ago, or several years ago now, Microsoft released something called the Business Process Automation Framework, I think it's called. So that basically is a framework where you can set up certain business processes to run automatically, where the payment process is one of them. So you can have it set up that it should do a payment file in company A every Wednesday for everything that is due within 5 days. In company B, and you set it up in all the companies, and you will then get the payment files created automatically in each individual company based on your settings for the payment methods and bank accounts, etc., without having to use centralized payment. So that's a really good area to look at if you haven't. So the bank automation stuff that came a couple of years ago in Business Process Automation Framework, it's a really good starting point. And of course, SK Global, AMC Banking, the other banking ISVs do this a lot better than standard. But start looking at standard. If it's not enough for you, reach out to AMC Banking or SK Soft. SK Soft is bought by Truvio as well, so Truvio. And see what they can help you with.
You got a thumbs up on that one.
Thank you.
On that answer. We do have time for one more question before we wrap up here after 45 minutes. I've asked in the chat if there are any more takers for questions. Give it 10 seconds. Don't be afraid. Ask Per a tough question. Let's see if we can stump Per. Okay, Per, I think we are okay. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I don't see any questions in the chat. What I would like to say is, Per, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to lead this discussion around AP automation. I think it's a topic and a challenge that a lot of people are facing these days, and they're looking for solutions, and they're looking how they address that in the future. I would also like to say a big thank you to everybody for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today, no matter what time zone that you might be in. And if you have any questions, please do not be afraid to reach out. We would be more than happy to have a conversation, answer those questions by email, or sit down with you and have a coffee and discuss it in more detail. With that, I will bring this webinar to a close, and I would like to wish everyone a super day and all the best. So thank you very much, Per. Thank you all.
Thank you all, and thank you, Angus. Have a really good day, everyone, and just reach out, as Angus said.
Yeah. Take care, everybody.